Hello, everyone, and welcome to Marsden Mondays. I have got such a treat for you today. I'm so excited because the first time that I heard this, it was like a nuclear bomb going off in my very little pea brain, right? It was amazing. So what we're going to do is we are going to today show you how you can prove that we have a soul and that it is immortal, right? I know everyone told you over time that you can't prove that it's some wackadoodle notion, but it is not. And so I want to welcome my friend Jim Burnham to the show. How are you doing, Jim?
Great, Matt. Thank you for having me on your program. This is
No,
a
it's my
great
absolute
topic.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you first explained this to me, it was life changing. I have to say, it was absolutely life changing. And I've seen when you've done it multiple times since, I've seen the reactions that people have had when you detail and you lay it all out for them, especially when we go through Richard Dawkins's arguments, which are just absolutely absurd when we go through them in the materialistic argument. Anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So, firstly, Jim, tell everyone a little bit about yourself. Tell them about your education, what you do, we just so people know. Me and Jim used to go to the gym almost every day together when I lived in California. So tell them a little bit about yourself.
Let's see. I grew up in New Mexico, but I'm in California now because my wife is just a California lover. We're moving opposite the rest of the world. Everything else is going Texas, but we're going the opposite direction to fill the void. Um, I graduated from Hillsdale College with a degree in philosophy. Great program there, and since then, I've done a bunch of work in what's known as apologetics, which is basically giving logical, scriptural, historical reasons for what Catholics believe and why. And so that's kind of where my background is. We've written some booklets on apologetics. But one of the things that keeps coming up over and over are the questions posed by the new atheists, right? You mentioned one of them, Richard Dawkins. Atheism is really on the rise, and for a lot of people, their arguments against God's existence and against the idea that we could have something special about us, that we have not just a life principle, which I think everyone agrees that we have, but that life principle survives the death of the body, that we really and truly do have an immortal soul. And it's great to explain this from a logical point of view, not using religion, not using the Bible, not using anything from Revelation, but simply using what the Greeks used, and that is just good old-fashioned logic. And you can prove that we have an immortal, an immaterial, a non-material principle in us that will survive the death of the body. And when you show that with a logical progression, I think it really helps give people confidence, that what they've been taught through maybe their religious background has some rational, defensible position. And secondly, that you can then explain that to someone without using the Bible, without using religion at all. And you can just simply use good old-fashioned Greek style logic. You can just use good old-fashioned common sense and reason. So it's a great topic, and I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that really blew me away. And I felt betrayed, actually, that I'd never
Right.
been told. I'd never been told this. I thought, like most people, oh, this certainly Christianity has this kind of, and God has this kind of ethereal thing, and you can't really prove it, and you have to just believe. It's just
Right.
about believing. And then the soul, like that's some other kind of cockamamie thing that someone came up with. But when I found out, firstly, about Thomas Aquinas and the proofs for the existence of God, that just blew my mind. That blew my mind. What else did about that was the arguments that people were making against it, which were straw man arguments,
Yeah.
which was fascinating. And then when we sat down and you started talking about this, I, I couldn't believe it. Like it was actually a very emotional moment because, look, I'm not one of those people that came to my faith through this amazing, like, spiritual experience. It wasn't like a touchy feely moment for me. It literally was. I mean, I read a great book by Lee Strobel called "The Case for Christ," and that really made me go, "Oh, hang on a minute! Like this is really real." and I've got to look into it. But the thing that really cemented it, like you said earlier, was that a lot of people make the arguments from the Bible. And if you do not believe that the Bible is an authoritative document, then what's the point? Right?
Right.
You people just
Yeah.
dismiss it. They're like, well, I don't believe in that anyway. It's just a crock. So whatever. But when I came to Thomas Aquinas, and then when we spoke about actually proving that there is a soul through logic and reason, and that it is immaterial and it is immortal, it it blew my mind. And I want to tell everybody about it, which is why I wanted you on here, because I've seen the reaction that people
Yeah.
have when you don't go, well, if you look at Matthew, blah, 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 you're not talking about scripture, you're talking about logic. And so
Right.
many, as you know, people over the years have, they've kind of separated like science and religion, which was never separate in the past. It was always complementary. And the same with philosophy. And the bedrock of this, to me, is so important to understand when reaching out to people who try and dismiss you and say, oh, it's the flying spaghetti monster, the guy up there with the big, white hair and wearing Birkenstocks. It's not that at all. So again, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you, the expert, talk about this, because I'm so excited. I genuinely am, because I think that it's going to really enlighten people. And I'd ask, even if you do not believe, right? If you're not a believer, this is not meant to be, an evangelical push, right? I want to make this absolutely clear. Like, you're not going to come onto my channel. I mean, you're going to hear all different things, right? All different things from all different people. But this is a philosophical thing. It's something that you should understand, whether you believe in a God or you don't, or whatever God you do believe in or you don't. Because in this era of fake news, right? You really need to understand that the arguments that are being presented to you, for the most part, are not real. They are straw man arguments that set something up that is not true, and then they knock down the thing that isn't true, which is absurd on the face of it, right, Jim? I mean,
Right.
you see this over and over and over again. So anyway, I'm going to hand it over to you. Let's get into it.
Okay. So this first argument is, there's four good, strong arguments, and I don't know if we'll have time to get through all four of them. Definitely want to spend a lot of time on this first argument because it lays the groundwork that we're going to need. And so before we get to the argument, I want to just get to a principle. We're going to have to start with a logical principle. And the principle comes from, it goes all the way back to Aristotle, but basically, in order to really know something, in order to be certain about something, we have to proceed in a certain order. We have to go from what's known as the more known and the more certain, and then we reason to the less known and the less certain. So the principle is we have to reason from the more known to the less known, and not in reverse. So let me give you an example. All right, I teach geometry. It's another thing that I do. I teach Euclidean geometry, and everyone knows in geometry we deal with points and lines and triangles and circles. So if we just consider a line and we consider a triangle, notice that when we define, we don't define a line as one of the third parts of a triangle, right? We define a triangle as three lines. It's because the line is better known to us. It's a simpler, more certain concept. So once we know what a line is, then we can take three of those lines and build a triangle. So in the order of knowing, we would say that the line is more certain than the triangle. The triangle is the less known.
Four would make a square.
Right, that's right. So we don't define like line as a quarter of a square or a third of a triangle or something like that, right? We use line as something simpler and more known, and then we construct triangles and squares and whatever else out of the line. So that's just an example of going from the more known, the line, to the less known, which is the triangle. So here's another example. What if I were to say to you, Matt, I don't speak a single solitary word of English. You'd say, well, wait, you just used Matt, I don't speak a single solitary word of English. So you used 9 or 10 words, right, to tell me, to try to draw the conclusion that you don't speak a single word of English. Can you trust that conclusion? Or are you more certain that I do know English because I strung together a whole bunch of English words, right? This is the reason that skepticism is self-refuting. The skeptic says, I can't know anything. There is
How
no
do you know
truth.
that?
Well, if there is no truth, what you said sounded like a truth, right? It sounded like you said there is no truth, but what you mean is that there's only one truth, namely that there are no other truths. So even as I make the claim there is no truth, I have to use the language of truth, which tells us truth is more known than error. And so if we see an argument that uses truth to conclude that there is no truth, that's an error of this principle. We're arguing from the less known, from there is no truth, against the more known that there is truth. So that's the principle we have to apply, and that is that. So basically, the principle as we extend it says this: any theory that says we don't know the truth, it would have to assume at every step of the argument that we do know truth.
Mm-hmm. To know what it isn't.
Right, to know what it isn't. So we can't, so any conclusion that says we don't know truth, but if we built it out of true statements, it has to be false. Because we're arguing from the less known, right? To deconstruct the more known. And what's
Now,
more known.
I have to say, like, for people that this is the first time they're hearing this philosophy, pause right now and go back. Well, not when when this is put out for the first time, but go back and listen to it again, right? Because when I first heard this, it took me some time to grasp it, right, to understand totally what you're saying. But once you have that, it's like it is true that there is no truth, right? Like that's the statement, right?
Right, there is no truth, but that sounded like a truth statement,
Yeah.
right? So here's another one. One of the guys that I studied in college was David Hume. David Hume is a very famous and notoriously hard to refute skeptic, and he has a very powerful book where he really criticizes things like causality, individuality, and his arguments are very, very subtle, and they're very difficult to refute until you step back and say, and you go, wait a minute. David Hume wrote a book. He caused a book. David Hume caused a book. But in that book, he says there is no cause. But I'm more sure that there's a cause because David Hume was the cause. So his conclusion that there is no cause is undermined by the more certain knowledge that I have that there is a cause. Likewise, in that book, David Hume says he denies personal individuality, that you're just a collection of experiences. There's no you, right, that's uniting those experiences. There's no Matt Marsden behind that collection of experiences. So he just says, I don't see a you, a me, an I, therefore why believe in it? Okay, except that David Hume, when he wrote his book, signed the book David Hume, right? And he'd sue you if you tried to take credit for that book.
And he'd say, it's mine. I
He'd say, it's mine.
caused it.
I wrote it. I caused it. But I don't believe in causality. And I don't believe in an I. Except that you do believe in an I, right? The more certain thing is that you do. So you can't use the more certain and then conclude something that is contrary to that which is more certain. David Hume believes in causality because he caused the book. David Hume believes in individuality. He signed the book. And he would protect his copyright right if you tried to take it from him. So
So on its face is just contradictory
Right. So,
immediately,
but it's
and
contrary to this principle. You have to go from the more known to the less known, not vice versa. You can't try to conclude something that's built on the more known and then try to undermine or deny that the thing that's more known. So that's our principle. Our principle is that if a conclusion is contrary to something more certain, we can get rid of it. And if we
Mhm.
conclude that there is no truth, but we built the argument using truth every step of the way, we can safely discard the argument. You can safely
It's a
discard.
nonsensical statement,
It's a
right?
nonsensical.
It doesn't make sense.
It's like it's like the person who says there is no truth, right?
Yeah.
But he
It
says
is
it's
true
true.
that there is no
It's true
truth.
that there is no truth,
Is that
right? So
true?
it's a self-refuting argument, and that's our point. Is that anytime you use the conclusion to undermine your certain principles, that conclusion can't hold. So that's our principle, and we're going to hold on to that. Now, this leads us to something that's related to it. And I know everyone loves science, and I'm a science teacher. I actually teach chemistry. I teach AP chemistry. So I love science. But as wonderful as science is, we need to remember that all our scientific knowledge is based on pre-scientific knowledge. Before we become a scientist, right, we have to learn a whole bunch of things through just pre-scientific learning. We have to learn what living is and dead and animal and plant and rock and is not. Right? We have to learn we have to learn thousands of concepts before we ever bring those into the scientific realm. And it matters because if our pre-scientific knowledge is not more certain and better known, then the science that we build on top of that can't be trusted. So think of this. If I read a thermometer in a lab, right, and I say, oh, it says 37 degrees Celsius, right? Am I more certain that the thermometer is right, or am I more certain that I can trust my eyes? Right? If I
Right.
can't trust my eyes to read the
It's
thermometer,
irrelevant.
it's
It's
irrelevant
irrelevant
what the
what the
thermometer
yeah.
says, right? So I have to trust the pre-scientific knowledge that I bring into science. And the reason I bring this up is that we have pre-scientific, that is sure and certain knowledge that we have a soul. Now, notice I'm not claiming that that soul's immortal. I'm not claiming that it's immaterial. I'm not claiming that it can survive the death of the body yet. But we have pre-scientific knowledge that we are alive. Now, what do I mean by soul? What the ancients meant, what the Greeks meant, what people mean today. A life principle, something that accounts for the difference between me and a rock, right? Or me and the dead me, right? If I died, I got hit by the proverbial cement truck, the dead bag of meat that would have been me before, right? There's a difference between that inanimate me and hopefully this living me. I know that I'm alive through my pre-scientific certainty. I know that I have five senses, right? I can see, I can smell, I can taste, I can touch. Okay. I know that I have emotions. I know that I can think. I know that I can choose. I know that I can love. Try to love, right? My wife might doubt, but right? So I know those things, right? So these things are self-evident. They are immediately apparent to us. They cannot be doubted. So that's the first thing. We cannot doubt that we have a life principle, something that distinguishes us from a rock. And what we call that life principle is a soul. That's all I mean by a soul. And by that definition, an animal would have a soul because an animal has a life principle. A plant would have a soul because plants exhibit the principle of life. So anything that has life has a life principle. All right. So we are alive. But what is not self-evident is that that life principle is immaterial, immortal, that it can survive the death of the body. And so that's why we need an argument. So here's the first of the four arguments. right? After all that long wind up and setup, the argument number one is to truly know something, to truly know, the soul must be immaterial. Okay? Why? Because as we saw in principle one, any theory about the soul concludes I don't know something. Okay? That would destroy itself, because at every step along the argument that concludes I don't know something, I would have to say I'd have to start, well, I know this, I know this, I know this, and therefore I know nothing. So any argument that concludes that I don't know things violates principle number one, right? It violates the principle that I'm building this argument on things that I say are true, and then at the end of that I'm saying, but none of that's true. So any theory of the soul that makes knowledge impossible must be false. It must be a false argument. It must be a false theory. Okay, so the theory that the human soul is nothing but the result of matter, that concludes that I can't really know something. And here's why, right? Matt, if you and I are nothing but bags of matter, right? That we're just physical, chemical processes obeying the irresistible laws of matter, that what we think are thoughts, our words are nothing more than the synapses firing in our brains. It's nothing more than the results of atoms colliding around. If that's true, and that's what strict materialism believes, materialism is simply the idea that all that there exists in the world is matter. That's it. There's no spirit. There's just nothing non-material, right? There's energy, there's matter, that's it. There's no spirit, there's no angels, there's no immaterial souls, there's no God, right? That's what strict materialism believes. But the problem is if everything is simply the result of a necessary chain of matter, then there is no freedom. Everything that I say, I've said in the last few minutes, everything you've said, Matt, in the last few minutes, we had to say, because
It wasn't a choice.
It wasn't a choice. It wasn't like we're trying to comprehend reality. It wasn't like we're trying to conform our thoughts to the way things really are. You had to say what you said because that's the sum total of the physical forces acting on you. And I had to say what I said because that's the sum of the physical forces acting on me. In which case, that none of that is knowledge, right? Knowledge presumes a freedom to look at a situation and to weigh the evidence and to pick the evidence that makes the most sense. But if we're just bags of matter, it's like this. Does water, if I pour water on a sloped hill, does that water have a choice about whether it can run downhill?
Right. It's the same like if you're a rock, like you don't have any option to.
You don't have any options.
You are a rock.
You're gonna follow what matter and the physical forces, friction, momentum.
Can't choose to go back up. Like the wood can't choose to go back up.
Water can't choose to not flow downhill. Right? Matter follows the irresistible material forces that act on it. If we are nothing but matter, everything we say, everything we do is simply something we had to say, we had to do because that's the sum total of the forces acting on us. In which case we have no freedom and we have no ability to know, to truly know something. Right? We can pretend that we know, we can say that we know, we can write books, but none of that is real knowledge because it's simply water running downhill without a choice.
Because you can't choose between one thing and another thing.
Right.
So
you can't weigh the evidence and go,
you can't weigh the evidence.
It seems like the evidence is that everything is material. It would mean that everyone who believes in materialism had to believe in materialism, not because they thought it was true, right?
So why write a book on it? Why write a book on it? Trying to persuade someone that it is true.
Right. If Richard Dawkins writes a book trying to persuade me that materialism is all that there is, that presumes that he's free truth about things, namely that materialism is true, that he's free to write a book, I'm free to read the book, and furthermore, I'm free to be convinced by his arguments and embrace materialism for myself as truth.
So
Well, what's the
you
problem
could
with that?
be, yeah, yeah. So the argument is, Jim, basically, is that you could decide if you're a material, if that's all you were, then you're either oriented to follow what he's saying or not follow what he's
Yeah,
saying.
and it's
You
going to be
don't have a
irresistible.
choice in the matter.
You're going to be irresistibly drawn to materialism, or irresistibly drawn to reject it. But no, there will be no choice in the matter, no freedom in the matter, and it's not like you can know anything. But these atheists, when they try to convince you that materialism is true, they think it's true. They think that they've had a real insight into the way the universe is. But in order to have a real insight into the way the universe is, to be free from the constraints of the material universe. There has to be something in you that is not water rolling downhill, that is able to evaluate and judge and choose and form theories that conform to the evidence. So the problem is that the materialist, in trying to convince you that he's right, is actually he's actually leaning on the more known principle, the more certain principle that he's free what's right. And the
How
only
do
way he
they
can be
defend
free
that,
to
though?
think he's right, the only way he's free to think he's what's right is if his materialism is not true. So that's
How do
more
they
sure.
defend that?
I don't know that they don't think that through. They simply don't think that through. They just simply go, it's like Hume. Why didn't Hume go, wait a minute, why am I dissing individuality when my name is on the book? Why did I get rid of causality when I clearly caused this book to be written? Right? Why do people deny truth and use the language of truth? It's just because they haven't heard of this principle that you have to start with the more certain and then judge the less certain, not vice versa. What they're doing is they're taking these ideas like, oh, maybe I'm in the matrix. Oh, maybe this is all a simulation. Oh, maybe I'm being deceived. They take these less known things and they use those to undermine the more known.
And
We
all
can't
these
let them
things,
have.
by the way,
We can't let them do
and all
that.
these, no, but all these things have been thought about thousands of years ago.
This goes
You
back.
know,
This is not new. This goes back
it's not
to
new.
Aristotle and Plato, the pagan Greeks, right? They weren't Christian. They didn't have a view of the Abrahamic God, but they understood that in order to know things, you had to have a freedom from strict materialistic necessity. And that's the argument, is that if we are able to truly know something, we have to be free. Let me. C.S. Lewis has a really great insight. Let me just read a couple paragraphs because he just lays this out so super clearly. C.S. Lewis says, all possible knowledge depends on the validity of reasoning. If the feeling of certainty which we express by words like must be and therefore and since, if that's a real perception of how things outside our minds really must be, well and good. But if this certainty is merely a feeling in our own minds and not a genuine insight into realities beyond them, if it merely represents the way our minds happen to work, then we have no knowledge. Unless human reasoning is valid, no science can be true. So this destroys science as well. If we're not free to know things, we're not free to know scientific things either, or mathematical things, or anything, right? It's not just metaphysics and religion that goes by the wayside. All knowledge, all human knowledge gets chucked to the wayside by strict materialism. Okay, so he goes on. It follows that no account of the universe can be true unless that account leaves it possible for our thinking to be a real insight. A theory which explained everything else in the whole universe, but which made it impossible to believe that our thinking was valid, would be utterly out of court. For that theory would itself have been reached by thinking. And if thinking is not valid, that theory would, of course, itself be demolished. It would be an argument which proved no arguments are sound, a proof that there is no such thing as proofs, which is nonsense. Thus, strict materialism refutes itself for the reason given long ago by Professor Haldane. If my mental processes are determined wholly, that's completely, by the motion of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true. And hence I have no reason to suppose that my brain is composed of atoms. So the conclusion of all this is that any account of the human mind or soul concludes that the mind or the soul is purely material. It's utterly ruled out because it destroys the possibility of reasoning. If, however, the soul is immaterial, then it can be free from the constraints of matter and materialism. It can be free from the constraints of materialistic necessity. And we're free to distinguish the true from the false. Because we're certain that we know true things, that we're more sure of that about that, then we are sure that the soul cannot be material. We can't pick a theory that destroys our certainty, pre-scientific certainty. And materialism destroys our ability to know. Therefore, we have to get rid of it because we know that we know.
And Jim, do a lot of people really know what materialism is? I mean, can you say that it's dressed up as other things? It's like anything, like you take a little piece of something and you attach it to a theory and then you just run with it. That seems to be easy, and unless you really examine it like you're doing right now,
right?
You just pull it apart.
If you talk to anyone about science, they would say, "Well, science examines material causes," and that's true. Science looks at material causes for material processes and phenomena. That's true, and science has been incredibly successful by restricting itself to looking at the material causes of things. But what we have to realize is that science, as successful as it's been, is not the only way to look at the world. For example, if I just looked at, if I just picked up some sheet music, pretend this is sheet music and it's a beautiful Mozart concerto, right? You could look at the material causes, right? And you could say, oh, this is what the paper is made of, and this is the ink that's on the page, and these are the mathematical intervals, we might even say, of where the notes are placed, right? But does that tell you anything about how this piece of music makes you feel? Does it tell you anything about the musical power of that? No. So there's a lot of ways. So we have to make sure that we don't take the successes of science and the scientific method and then take those and just bulldoze the rest of the world and say, well, science has been so successful, we're going to chuck everything that isn't science. Well, wait a minute.
Well,
there's a lot of stuff.
The other question
science, right?
Yeah, the other question is why was someone questioning those things in the first place, and how do they understand that science and process it? Right. Like, I mean, how would they be able to reason through something, or like an experiment, or how would they understand any of that and what it means in the context of the
science
world?
itself is built on metaphysical principles. Science itself is built on the idea that there's a proportionate cause for every effect, and there's certain, and science doesn't tell you that. Science doesn't say every cause has an effect. That's a metaphysical principle that we bring to it. So our science is built out of metaphysical principles. Our science is built out of pre-science, as we saw, and things that are more sure and more certain. Scientific things are actually more true and more certain, and we build our science on top of them. And if our science leads us to conclude, oh wait, materialism is the only thing that there is, we've suddenly, it's like building a tree house and then cutting down the tree. Say, I don't need the tree anymore that supports this tree house. No, you do. You need the tree of pre-scientific knowledge to support your scientific endeavors. And if you ever think,
Jim, the other thing is what has happened frequently. I was looking up something that I can't remember what it was now, but it was about what Einstein said, and he said something, and then I think it was Hoyle that said that it was something to do with the theory of relativity, and he said, "Oh, there was a mistake." That I put something in that was a mistake, and then because Hoyle said something, hope I'm getting this right, and then years later they found out that he was right about what he said, and that was the missing thing that was in there. So actually the thing that he said that he thought was wrong was actually right. So what we're seeing often is people make statements in science, and this is just the nature of science, right? They make statements in science and they build, and then actually you find out, well, hang on a minute, we found something even deeper than this, like whether it be on like a quantum level, that actually changes that. So you have to strip that back again and then strip the next thing down and then build back up again from there. And this continually happens. I mean, we see it when people say, well, the science has changed, right? Well, that's part and parcel of it, right? Like there are certain things that you can guarantee, like that I'd imagine. I mean, look, I'm not a scientist, but you look and you say, well, what is the freezing point of water, right? What is that? That is something that is tangible, and then you're going to be building stuff on top of that. That is something that is known, right?
Right.
And we not only do we understand it, we can see it, right? And we can touch it, and we can feel it, and we see it going from a liquid to a solid, and then there are principles that can move forward from that to build on. And I mean, that's a very basic example, right? But you can do that in across everything. But like you said, you have to be able to have reason and to ask the questions to even be able to build it in the first place, or to reevaluate it and correct it.
Right. Science depends on being able to, use your theories, and evaluate those theories and change them if the evidence doesn't support those theories. And again, the point is that presumes a freedom of the mind, a freedom from materialistic necessity that people who think science is committed to materialism wouldn't give you.
Mm-hmm.
So scientists themselves, when they do science, are presuming a freedom that they might deny if they think that science is committed to materialism. But science isn't committed to materialism. Science is committed to looking at material causes. But who says material causes are the only causes? Right? Aristotle said, listen, you have material causes, you have formal causes, you have final causes, you have efficient causes. Right? So if you look at a statue, like let's have a bronze statue, you can say, well, what's the material cause? What's this made out of? Oh, it's bronze, and it has a certain density, and it has a certain conductivity, right? And we can look at all the material factors about the bronze of the statue. But that doesn't tell us the shape of the statue, right? Oh, it's a shape of Mercury, or it's a shape of, David, right? It's the shape of David, right? So if you tell me that the David is made out of marble, that doesn't tell me anything about the shape of the statue, or why Michelangelo made it David rather than some other character, or and it doesn't tell me that Michelangelo is the efficient cause, right? Telling me that it's made out of marble tells me something, right? But does it tell me everything about that statue? No. And does it tell me the most important things about the statue? No. Right? The most important things about this David is what's it the shape of, and why did Michelangelo, the efficient cause, make it that way? What was he trying to do? Show or demonstrate or what? Like, why did he do it? Right? And all those questions are different from the material cause. Right? So it's okay to look at the different causes of things. It's okay to even focus on the material cause and say, listen, I really want to hyper focus on this because it's going to help me really do science well. And focusing on material causes does help science do. But it's a mistake to think that commits us to materialism. It doesn't. In fact, it destroys the possibility of reasoning if you believe in strict materialism.
And a lot of people don't understand that, right?
Down to the ground, right?
It's almost like, they take the first page of philosophy or like the argument of philosophy and then just move forward instead of like looking and looking at the rest of the book and saying, well, hang on a second, or okay, we're setting up these arguments to be tackled, but you've just left them at the arguments made by the atheist. You haven't actually looked at number one, looked at if they're refuting it, what they're actually refuting, because a lot of the times the questions, as I said before, is set up as straw man questions,
right,
or straw man statements to be refuted. Well, actually that, and what the most common one, and I'm just going to say here right now, is that everything has a cause. Right, that is not an argument from Aquinas. He did not say that.
No, he said everything.
He didn't say that.
He says everything caused has a cause. Everything that's an effect has a cause. But you can't just multiply effects, infinitely. You'll finally have to come to something that is an uncaused cause.
Yeah.
Right. So every effect has a cause, but that doesn't mean, that's not to say that everything without exception has a cause. What we say is that everything caused has a cause, but you at the beginning of that, you have to have something that is the beginning of that whole series, the first domino that knocks over the rest of the dominoes, and you have to finally come to an uncaused cause. And that's not an exception to the principle. It is simply saying that you simply don't have the rest of this without something outside of that series. Right. It has
to be.
It has to be, or you wouldn't have. Right. If there was no first cause, then there would be no subsequent causes and therefore no subsequent effects. But we have sure and certain knowledge that there are effects, and those effects have to have a sufficient cause. And in that series of causes, right, there has to be something that is an uncaused causer. Right. It's like my example is like if you saw the end of a train, you saw the caboose of a train, and it was being pulled. Right. You'd say, well, it's being pulled by the car in front of it. And what's pulling that car? The car in front of it. And you look up the train, but the train goes for miles, and then it finally just goes around a bend, around a mountain, and you can't see the beginning of the train. Right. But you know every car is being pulled by the car in front of it. Now, can that continue forever? What do you know has to be at the very, very front of that train? Not just an endless parade of more cars, right? Even if you can't see it, you know that the last car wouldn't move and the next to last car wouldn't move, and none of the cars would move if there wasn't something at the very front of that train that wasn't being pulled, but that was actually doing the pulling.
Yeah.
And what we would say is every car that is pulled needs a puller. Okay. But the puller doesn't need a puller. The puller is the puller. Right. So yeah, we won't. Yeah, that might be another time. Might fun to come back and do. No.
But it'd be fun to come back. Important.
Yeah, it is, because oftentimes they have a very simplistic argument to say, well, everything needs a cause, then God needs a cause. Who caused God? QED. I got you. No,
yeah, boom,
you didn't. Boom, you didn't get me. You didn't understand the argument. The argument is not that everything without exception needs a cause. It means that everything that isn't its own cause, right? Everything that's an effect has to have a previous cause, but we still have to have something that isn't caused. That's what the first thing is. It's the uncaused cause.
The uncaused first cause. Anyway, I'm not going to. We're not going to go there. Although I love this. I mean, that was the other nuclear bomb that went off in my head. But so anyway, materialism. It's a ridiculous argument on the face of it. I see a lot of people.
The possibility of thinking. It destroys the possibility of thinking. It destroys the possibility of science. So how scientists can embrace something that concludes that everything they've done is nonsense, to me, is baffling.
There has to be some kind of like major reason for the cognitive dissonance, right? There has to be, because I should say, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Why are you performing any experiments?
Right. I think they haven't thought it through. Dawkins, if you confronted him and said, listen, you're presuming that you have a freedom from materialistic necessity to see the world as it is, materialistic only, and a freedom to write the book, and the freedom to have me read the book, and my freedom to be convinced by the book. You're presuming all these freedoms that couldn't possibly exist if you're right. So why do you believe that? Because it's like Hume, David Hume, massive skeptic. He was a great pool player. There was this real disconnect in his life. His metaphysics said causality doesn't exist, but he still shot pool, which is just like one ball causing another ball to move, right? So there is a causative dissonance because I think they haven't thought it through. I think we don't teach metaphysics. We don't teach logic. I think a lot of people haven't heard this principle that goes all the way back 2,000, 2,500 years, that we have to start from the more known and use that to judge the less known. And not flip it around.
I didn't know it. And like I said, when it was explained to me, and look, for those people that are watching, I know sometimes this is a very difficult subject to get your head around, but it's worth like pursuing it, because it really is a key to unlock so much in your life and the way to see things. And certainly for me, it was almost like the Rosetta Stone for me to see how people have been lying to me for a very, very long time, because there are actually people that know this and they're duplicitous and deceptive, and they don't want you, they'll say all this other stuff. It's like anything. It's like when Hilaire Belloc talks about heresies, he says the greatest heresies take an element of truth and they wrap it around all this other stuff, right? And what people do is they'll point to the truth in it over and over and over again. And we see this all the time today in the media, especially in politics. They'll take an element of truth, right, and then they'll wrap it up in all this garbage and package it to people. And then when they get called on it, they always go to the element of truth, right? And they build on top of that. And they say, well, and people go, well, that's true. So I wonder if everything else is, well, it's disingenuous, right? Because they're not using the right principles, not only to analyze what they're putting forward, right, but the principles of being honest and true and good, and just trying to portray things in an effective and correct light.
Right. One of the key, I would say that the key, and I'm building, I think the biggest problem that we have, just both in thinking and probably in educating people how to think, we fail to make important distinctions. And we need to be able to distinguish, right, this fundamental subterranean level of true things, this pre-scientific truth, and then the scientific truths that are built on those, and the metaphysical presuppositions of those scientific truths. And what we're doing is we just have this kind of fuzzy thinking. We say, oh, Carl Sagan knew a lot about stars, therefore Carl Sagan must know a lot about everything. Huh? How does that work? Right? Maybe he's a great cosmetologist, right? Or cosmologist. That's the word, not cosmetologist. Maybe he knows a lot about astronomy, right?
Does makeup?
Yeah, he does makeup. But just because someone's a great mathematician or someone's a great astronomer, that doesn't mean they know anything about philosophy or metaphysics.
We don't say it about like football players or soccer players. We don't say, oh, well, they're amazing soccer players and they can read the game brilliantly, so surely they're great in philosophy.
Oh, they should be economists. No, we say, listen, you might be really, really great in one area of your life, and that means you may know nothing else. You may be a great surgeon. That doesn't give you some sort of insight into politics. You can be a great astronomer and know nothing about philosophy. And that's being able to distinguish where you know something and just where that fits within the rest of the wide body of knowledge. And we have this idea of misplaced authority, right? Oh, this guy knows a little about this. Well, he must know everything.
Well, that's a huge thing. Oh, and by the way, the other thing is if you don't have a degree or you don't have any kind of knowledge, then you cannot know truths, right? I mean, we just saw that what just happened. When over the last few years, we can't say what it is on YouTube because we'll get banned. But all of a sudden, the argument from authority came in, and I'm like, that just it's a fallacy. Okay, it's just a fallacy.
Anyone who's taken an entry-level course on logic will tell you that an argument from authority is the weakest of the arguments. It's the weakest argument. So here we are using one of the weakest arguments in one of the greatest crises of our day without realizing how poor an argument it really is. And again, it's to say,
but then
we're
they
not
think
making
they're
the right
being very, very
distinctions.
smart. They think they're being very, very smart by doing this. And really, it's just it's the feeblest thing to push over. But it does make you feel, certainly on social media, you feel like you're being gaslit because you'll come back at it, and then you have an absolute avalanche of people that are thinking this, or should I say, not thinking, but have the same way of thinking, not thinking, push back at you. I mean, it's really remarkable. And by the way, it's the same thing with doctors, by the way, because you can, and there's people like my friend Mark Lobliner and Alan Roberts will tell you, is that doctors actually know very, very little about nutrition. And when you're becoming a GP, you can't do all that. That's why they actually go and specialize in certain things.
You can only study a very small slice of the human body. And so they don't take a holistic approach. How could they? So they study the human body from a very, very narrow, kind of mechanistic, a pharmacy-oriented approach, and that has certain strengths to it, right?
Hmm.
But again, it's not the only way to see the human body. And again, it's like mistaking the material cause for all the causes, right? The material
Yeah.
cause is one out of four causes. We don't want to get that confused and just say, oh, well, because it's been so successful in scientific invention, we're going to throw out the other three causes, right? It's like saying, oh, well, someone's, astronomy is really, really good. We're not going to, that's it. We're not going to study literature or music anymore. It's just all astronomy all the time. That would be a very thin and sad view of the universe, right? To say, well,
Or yeah, or
just because it doesn't fit into,
studying the universe and the material aspects of it, and not
right,
asking why it is, like
right,
why it's there. Why did it come into existence?
right. It's
I
like
mean,
studying
these are the
a
great
right, right.
questions.
Look at a human being. If you studied a human being from his just his purely materialistic physical causes, right? You could say, oh, a human being is 67% water and all these other percents phosphorus and carbon and blah 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 blah. And you could break down our chemistry, and you could break down our physics, and you could break down the speed of our neuronic firing. Okay, does that tell you anything about what human beings like, what they want, that they love, that they like friendship, that they're communal creatures, that they pine for justice, they want to organize politically? I mean, none of those things, right? From a purely physical chemical point of view, they don't tell you anything important about what human beings really are and what they really want, right? For that, we have to use psychology, and we have to use there's a whole other branch where we try to figure out what motivates human beings and what human beings are all about, right? And the most interesting things about human beings are not our chemical makeup. It's about our ability to know and to love and to choose and to desire and to create and to laugh. And I'm telling you, none of that stuff comes about purely because of our chemical uh, physiology,
Yeah, and
right?
maybe this is another. I mean, we should keep this for another time. But it also doesn't come with any kind of evolution, because evolution would mean that we would all that we would be looking for is for us to succeed, right? And be basically top dog, right? Like that's what the evolutionary thing would be looking at. You'd look at and you'd say, whatever benefits me the
Mm-hmm.
most is what I should desire. But we know that that is not what we desire for the most part, right? We won't become successful at the expense of damaging someone else. Like everyone will look, I mean, although some people do that, it's widely frowned upon. And so we can all agree that that in principle is a bad thing. Why? Why if it's just evolution, and that that the whole point about us succeeding is getting what we need for us and for our family? Why is it then, if evolution is the thing that's driving that, that we feel so guilty when we do it, and we don't like when other people commit horrendous crimes? And why is it that we argue against them? So, like the Nazis, for example, they would argue, you know what, you want that house, go get it. It's survival of the fittest, right? Like you are the master race. Go get that house from whoever it is. And the moment that was switched on them, right, they stopped using that argument. They started saying, well, hang on a second, hang on. And they appealed to our better nature. What does that mean, to have a better nature? Why? Why? If they were being intellectually honest, they go, okay, kill us, right, because we did bad things and you are stronger than us. But they
Right.
didn't, right? So they jumped away from it at the first opportunity, right, when they got pushback. So we know, I know this is like tangentially going off a little bit, but again, people don't tend to think these things through, because, hey, listen, the Kardashians are on, right? But
Right.
these things are very, very important, and they're very, very important because they actually form the basis of how we make our decisions for things like politics, and seeing the way that there's manipulations from people who know better. Not all of them do, but some of them really do, and they know how to play the game. Anyway, let's
No,
go
no,
back to the
no,
subject
no.
matter.
I mean, I
So,
want to follow up. I think you brought something really important, right? Like, think about it. According to the materialistic uh, uh, view of the universe, right? The universe is mindless. There's no minds, right? It's meaningless. There's no purpose for the universe. It's completely deterministic. It's non-rational. It's value neutral. Things are just what they are. Okay, that's the materialistic universe. But we are mindless. We're self-aware. And we're not meaningless. We see meaning everywhere. We look for meaning everywhere. What does that mean? What does that painting mean? What does this book mean? What did your text mean? Right? What did that emoji mean? Right? We look for meaning everywhere. The universe is supposed to be deterministic, but we think we're free. Free to believe in materialism, free to believe in atheism, free to convince others to join us in our freedom. Right? We think we're rational. Materialist is right. The universe is completely non-rational. We think we are people of worth, that human beings matter, right? That the death of a human being, an innocent person, matters. Well, the universe doesn't care. The universe has no values, right? We think we have rights, and you have to respect my rights, and I have to respect your rights. But the universe has no rights. So that's a really weird, we have this, the materialistic vision of the universe is something that we don't live in. We say,
We
oh,
don't
the universe,
recognize it, really.
I
We
don't,
don't
right. We
recognize
say,
it
oh,
as
it's
our lived
mindless and meaningless
experience
and
at all.
deterministic, but it's none of, John Searle, he had a really interesting thing. He basically said, how can we square this self-conception we have of ourselves as mindful, meaning-creating, free, rational agents with a universe that consists entirely of mindless, meaningless, unfree, non-rational, brute physical particles, right? It doesn't make sense. That's not the world we live in. That's not the world we want to live in. So we have this bifurcation. On the one hand, we say, yes, materialistic, the universe. On the other hand, we want to live in a world of love and freedom and choice and rights and dignity and justice and meaning and good and bad. We have it both ways, right?
Well,
If you
because
want
the
these things,
problem,
you have to preserve the truths that guarantee those things. And one of the things that guarantees those things that you want, everyone wants, even the atheist, you have to give up materialism to preserve the freedom of the soul. And once you give up materialism, you have an immaterial soul. And an immaterial soul can't be destroyed. So it's naturally immortal. That's the argument.
so what do you mean? What would you break down as an immortal soul? What does that mean?
So if we can say that there's something immaterial, right? Something that isn't determined, that isn't itself completely material, isn't completely determined by material things. So that's what I mean by immaterial. And if we don't have an immaterial soul, we can't know things. We can't know science. Everything falls apart. Freedom, justice, rationality, dignity, it all goes away if we don't have
And
freedom.
just for clarification, immaterial means not of material things.
Not made of something material. So it's not part of the physical universe. We think the physical universe is composed of matter and energy. And we're saying that in addition to matter and energy, which are physical things in the physical universe, we're saying there's something else that is free from that is not material. It's not matter or energy. Now you can call that spiritual if you like. That's fine. But what we mean is it does not have matter or energy like material energy. It's not electromagnetic radiation or something like that. So if something has no matter, how can you destroy it? You can destroy me, right, by just taking me apart, right? Just take a laser and slice me down, or cut my head off, or lop my arms off,
Or blow you up.
blow me up, right? Burn me, right? If you take me apart, you break me. But if something is immaterial, now it doesn't have any parts. If it's not made of matter and particles, then you can't slice it in two. You can't chop it in half. You can't burn it. You can't separate it. And if you can't burn it or chop it or separate it, then you can't destroy it. So something that is immaterial is naturally indestructible. It's naturally immortal. So if you can grant that there is something that is different from matter and energy, the physical world, something non-physical, that non-physical thing cannot be destroyed by anything physical. So it will naturally persist. And if it is animating a body, if it is the life principle of a body, and that body gets old or hit by a cement truck, the body will die, but that principle, that immaterial principle is indestructible. It's naturally immortal. This goes all the way back to the Greeks. Plato believed this on the same logical principles, that the soul has powers. It can conceive of immaterial ideas. And in order to conceive of immaterial ideas, it must not be material. It must be an immaterial faculty. So that's one of the second arguments. So that's another argument for the immateriality of the soul, right? The soul is capable of unchanging truths. Like, I'll quiz you now, you're on the spot, right? What is the sum of the interior angles of a triangle? What are the interior angles of a triangle add up to?
180 degrees.
180 degrees. Is that true?
Do I pass my math class, my geometry class?
Is that true? Is that only true on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or is that always true?
No, it's a universal truth.
It's eternally true, right?
Yeah.
It's an unchanging truth. Well, can
I ask you this, Jim? Can I ask you this?
Truths, yeah. Unchanging truths require an unchanging immaterial thing, because everything in matter can be changed. But you have in you an idea, the interior angles of a triangle equal 180 degrees. That's an unchanging truth. There must be an unchanging principle in you that holds that truth. And that can't be destroyed. That can't be taken apart.
And you have to be able to know it, because it's a concept, right? It's not, although you can make it into something physical.
So we have to be sure. But if we're sure that that's true, and we're sure that that's eternally, unchangeably true. So here's the principle for that argument. Everything in matter can be destroyed, right? So if something resides in matter or is itself material, then it can be destroyed. So if I take this, I have a white door here. The white is in that door. Well, if I take that door apart, that white is going to be destroyed along with the door. So anything in matter, okay, it's subject to change, because material things are not eternal. But that truth you just told me about the interior angles of a triangle, that's an eternal truth. So that can't be in matter. Whatever's holding that truth in you, in my brain, well, maybe it uses your brain, but it's not your brain, because that's material. It's actually your mind or something like that. It's some immaterial faculty capable of knowing unchanging truths. That is an argument that you must have something that is immaterial, that is itself unchangeable, that can't be, like I say, taken apart or dismantled or suffer all the changes that material things are susceptible to.
So 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? That's another example.
It's an eternal, unchanging truth. Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you take two and two things and you destroy them. It's still gonna mean that. Like, nobody ever argues that 2 plus 2 equals 3. I know, probably I did in my younger years when I was doing my math exam, but nobody really argues that, and it's a universal truth that everybody understands,
right?
And that stands up outside of the physical, right?
That's
it just does. That is a principle that has to have always existed,
right? Well, think about this. Just picture an idea in your mind. Like, picture an idea of what a horse is. Now, not a particular horse, but just the idea of horseness. Horse. Or the idea of justice. Okay? Picture the idea of justice in your mind. Now ask yourself this. How much does that idea weigh? Well, what color is that? What color is that idea? Well, what size is that idea? Questions are irrelevant, aren't they, when it comes to the idea of justice? It doesn't have a size. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a color. It doesn't have a weight. It completely lacks any material property. because it's immaterial. The idea is an immaterial idea. But yet you're able to hold that immaterial idea. The question is how? Because matter, anything in matter has size, weight, shape, color. Anything in matter has material characteristics, but the idea of justice has none. So whatever's holding that idea can't be in matter. So the fact that we can conceive and hold immaterial ideas in our mind is another proof for the immateriality of that faculty. And something that's immaterial can't be destroyed. This is exactly the argument that Plato used for the immortality of the soul. The fact that we can conceive of immaterial ideas, and they can't, something material can't conceive of something immaterial. So wherever that's being held, it's not being held in matter and energy.
Like
it's
a rock.
Right.
A rock. We have no reason to believe. I mean, some people say, well, it doesn't have a brain, right? But rock has no idea about something that is immaterial because it's a rock, and it's only material.
Has nothing in it that would be capable of forming and holding that idea, right? It's purely matter. And in fact, it's inanimate matter, right? It has no life principle whatsoever. So you'd be a lot better off trying to convince me that your dog could conceive of the idea of justice, right, than a rock. So, but again, how can a purely material being conceive of a purely immaterial idea? Can't be done. Which means then we have to believe that we have some faculty that can hold, conceive, and know, and choose, and evaluate, and promote these immaterial ideas, which is what we do all the time.
So, but what is the argument if someone says, "Well, that's your mind"?
Because
that is your mind.
Yeah, the mind is like. But what people often say, that's just your brain. That's just your brain. That's just the synapses in your brain firing. It's just what they call an epiphenomenon of just all of this. You just get enough nerve impulses together. If you get billions and trillions of nerve impulses all running around together, then that is what thought is. That is what your mind is. It's just the product of these physical processes. And of course, the problem with that is that then your ideas are in matter, and nothing in matter can be unchangeable. Nothing in matter can be immaterial. Nothing in matter that's just a purely result of material causes can be free. So that ruins knowledge, right? And science and all our important human endeavors. So I guess the counter argument that you will hear is, well, wait a minute. Okay, you say that your mind is not, it's somehow different from your brain. But what happens if you get a brain injury, right? I hit you with a bat and I ruin the front part of your brain. All of a sudden, you can't think very clearly. So doesn't that prove that your brain is your mind? I damage your brain and then your mind can't work. So aren't they the same thing? And of course, that's a strong argument, right? And the answer to that argument is there's think about sight, right? We can see, right? We can see each other on this cool technology here. Now, there's a couple ways that you could ruin my sight, right? Fortunately, you're far enough away, but if you were in the same room, right, you could claw my eyes out, right? You could ruin my eyes, and that would ruin my sight. But there's another way that you could ruin my sight. You could just turn out all the lights, right? And nothing would be wrong with my eyes, but I just wouldn't have the proper object of my vision. In order to see, I need light. If you take away the light, I can't see. And it may I'm sure it almost assuredly is true that the mind, the soul, the intellectual faculty of man needs the brain to present to it the images of sensation. But That's it. That's like the light that the eyes need. The mind needs the brain, but if the brain is damaged, it doesn't damage the mind. It just damages the mind's ability to get the objects
To
of
be a
thought.
medium,
It's the
but to be a
medium.
medium
It's the
between the two,
medium,
right?
right? So I think that would be the way we'd explain why a brain injury leads to mental impairment. It's not because we've broken the brain, the mind. It's not that we've damaged the immaterial faculty. We've simply damaged the thing it needs, the object that it needs to do its job. So now it can't get these images that it needs, and therefore it can't do the judging and the evaluating and the knowing and the all that stuff that we can do with our intellectual faculty. So I guess that would be the answer to that, is that it seems like the brain is the mind. There's definitely a
A
connection there.
link.
There's a
Yeah.
link. The brain is the medium through which the mind, right? We believe that our senses give us knowledge of the physical world, right? Well, our senses, right, send their impulses to the brain, right? And then through the brain, our minds are able to abstract things like the idea of horse or the idea of justice, right? So the mind needs the brain, just like the brain needs the senses. But the brain is not the senses, and the mind is not necessarily the brain. The mind uses the brain, like the brain uses the senses, but they're different faculties.
Right.
They have to
And
be.
and
They
so
have to
and
be,
so
or we can't know things, or we can't have science, or we can't have freedom, or we can't have any of the things that are interesting about human beings. And since we're
and
more
so
sure that those things are real, we've got to accept the conclusion that we have to have an immaterial soul to observe that reality.
well, I was going to say that because the soul cannot be made out of parts, it would be the same as the mind. So it wouldn't be two separate parts
Right,
as
exactly
we
right.
think of it, like a head and arms and legs. You know that it would be one. It's just another way of describing it,
Right. And we would say
or part of it.
in that immaterial faculty, we can distinguish various powers, right? We have the power to know, we have the power to choose, unless you destroy human freedom. And there are people who will. But again, that's just using the unknown to undermine the more known, right? We know we can choose. We know, like, I'm going to have coffee now. Oh, I'm going to have that extra piece of pie now. Oh, I'm going to do that extra rep. We make choices all the time. We know we can. We have that pre-scientific knowledge. What was my point there? My point is that I don't know what was our point. I may have lost my point. I'm losing my mind.
No. Well, we've gone across a ton of a ton of topics, and I hope that people that are watching it are following, because it is. If you've never ever tackled anything like this before, this is a lot of information to take in, and I think that, like I said, if you go back and rewatch it and try and get hold of it and grasp these concepts, it's really, really important, because to understand, to truly understand, as Jim has put forth, that we have something that is immaterial, that is not made out of parts. I mean, it can't be broken up into parts, which means it's not made out of matter. It is something outside of matter. And we have to, because we have concepts, I'm just kind of condensing and giving a summary, because we have concepts that are not material concepts. They're outside of these. They're eternal truths, as they were, like 2 and 2 equals 4. That is outside of the material world. We have to have something within us that can recognize that. And the material us cannot recognize that. It has to be something that is immaterial. And some people can call it a mind, right? And again, we're trying to, as you just did, you separated that away from the brain, even though they're linked, they're separate. But it is the soul that understands those things, that can relate to them. Because here's the thing, talking about dogs, I'm just going to go back to this quick segue away from what we're talking about. The concept of dog, right? If I did a really bad, and I'm a terrible artist, so I'm not going to do it. If I had a pen and paper, I'd do it.
Right.
And I drew a dog, like a generic dog, and I put it up like that, even how bad it is, most people would say that's a dog, right? We know that's a dog. But if you put it in front of a dog, the dog wouldn't bark at it like it was a dog, because it doesn't understand that. It cannot comprehend that we know of, right? Because you don't, like, if you put a picture of a dog, like you've seen it sometimes, even on those like TikTok videos where, you know, they'll push like that big, I don't know if you've seen it, they'll push like a big, like white lion into the room, and there's a dog there, and he jumps back.
I've seen
Have
that.
you seen it? He like freaks out because it's a physical thing that they can see and they understand, even though it's, you know, they don't know that it's alive. They might think that it is. But if you were to like walk in with a giant painting of a tiger, they wouldn't jump back in the same manner, right? Because it's a concept of it that we can comprehend, the idea of tiger, right? That they don't. There's no reason for us to think that they can understand that, right?
Right. And I mean, and even if they can get it in some crude representationalist way, there's no way that they can get it in kind of a universal way, like I say, just something abstract. Like if you tried to explain the idea of justice or the concept of love, right? Again, it's a completely immaterial thing. It has no way to even represent it. But you know, but even like I say, that's one of the strongest arguments. That's the one Plato used. The fact that we can form these immaterial, universal concepts that completely abstract from all matter. Right? My image of a dog doesn't have anything to do with an actual bit of hair or an actual dog toenail or a tongue. It doesn't need any of that. Right? That ability to abstract is unique. But
Have thoughts.
And they simply have no material elements to them. Therefore, the thing that is doing it has to be an immaterial element, which can't have parts, and a thing without parts can't be naturally destroyed. And again, you don't have to believe in the Christian soul or the transmigratory soul or anything. You just have to say, listen, the only way to explain how I can do what I do, I must have a certain faculty that is free from materialism and that is free from the constraints of matter and that enables me to do these unbelievably interesting immaterial things like know unchanging truths and know immaterial concepts and to know truth at all. To be able to know truth at all requires a freedom from materialism that no scientist can explain on purely scientific grounds. Right? That's why we have to go back to pre-scientific grounds and pre-scientific truths. And one of those is we got to have something to explain how we know that, and we do know. And without an immaterial faculty, call it a mind, call it a soul, call it an immaterial principle, that has to exist because that's the only way to explain what we're sure of. And we have to start with what we're sure of and not be confused about, oh, are we in a simulation? Thanks, Elon Musk. Are we in the Matrix? Thanks, Neo. That's all that's being confused by the most unknown thing out there. Start with what we know. Hang on to what we know. Preserve what we know. And the only way to preserve that is to preserve the idea of an immaterial soul.
And isn't it funny that people will go down every other avenue apart from this one? I think a lot of the times it's because...
Like, all we're trying to do here is preserve the validity of human thought. How revolutionary is that? I'm just trying to say, yeah, when you think something, just a result of random neurons firing in your mind, you're not just water running downhill, the sum total of the bag of chemicals that you are. You're a free agent. You can think free thoughts, and your thoughts really matter. Oh, I'm a revolutionary, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. The funny thing is and I see this a lot when you see these. It's certainly more prevalent now with the advent of social media. This repackaging of old ideas as new and as cutting edge, and you see it a lot with the new age self-help people, where they'll take certain things actually that are rooted in biblical teachings, and they'll kind of like package them up and send them off as something else. And you see this a lot with these kind of things. They'll take a snippet of it, they'll take a little bit of Plato or a little bit of Aristotle, and they'll just kind of like, come up with their own, look at what a genius I am. And actually it's been thought through. And, I mean, there are arguments, right? There are philosophical arguments, and people make them all the time. But I think when you're looking at these things, the weakest arguments are the ones from the new atheists, because
atheism has been around a long time. Their arguments aren't new. They're just repackaged, but they are the same tired arguments that have been answered. I mean, and I think decisively by great brains, Augustine, Aquinas. Modern day, you've got people like Mike Agros and Ed Feser. You've just got really great intellectual geniuses who are simply just saying, listen, you basically have two tired arguments against God's existence, right? Problem of evil, and the problem is we just don't need God to explain things. Those are the only two arguments there are. They've been, and everything else is just a repackaging of those same arguments. It doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be made. They do deserve to be made. They deserve to be examined. They deserve to be criticized and demolished, right? So it's not like the work has been done so we don't have to do the work. Every new generation is going to encounter those arguments, however repackaged or however old, and they're going to have to re-satisfy themselves of their inadequacy. But the work has been done. We just have to go and make people aware of it. Just like the arguments for the proof for the existence of the immortal soul, that work has been done, right?
Yeah.
And unless you can show
but it's
that those fail, right? Yeah, these are part of our. These are part of our heritage, our patrimony. This is part of our intellectual heritage that we haven't for the most of us received. And that's a shame.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible, and that's why I was so excited to get you on, because there's this massive wealth of knowledge that's just there if people just want to delve into it. And yet, look, I know, like I said, I am not the brightest button. I'm not a super intellectual, and so when I looked at these things, I had to just go through them over and over and over again to understand them. Because again, I look at philosophy like math. Like if you miss a fundamental principle of it, right? If you miss that one fundamental principle, it's really difficult, because it gets, things like the acts, the certain terminology that philosophers use, and they anticipate that everyone knows what they're talking about. You can be completely lost in a conversation because the words that they use are used for other things, right? And so when the majority of the general public hear those words, they think of something completely different than what a philosopher is, the context in what the philosopher's using them in, right? Like they're different. They mean different things. And I don't know why it is with philosophy that people kind of like switch off on that, when on other things we don't. We understand that you can say one word and it can mean multiple different things.
Yeah, multiple levels of meaning.
I don't know. I don't know why that is. And so for me, I really had to take the time to understand what those things meant and to keep them present in my mind when I'm having this kind of a conversation. And I know that seems weird. I don't know if it's because philosophy is spoken and it's about things that a lot of the time are intangible. Whereas when these other things, when you're referring to things in the English language, other things in the English language, normally they're material, tangible things, or stuff that you can really relate to. And not many people sit there and think about what we're talking about, which we should, because for years and years and years and years, that, as you said, that was our heritage. This is what people spoke about around the campfire, is, what am I? Why am I here? What is the world about? What is the universe for? Like, what started?
What am I for?
These are the
what are we?
what is
those
my
are the
purpose?
fundamental questions. Those are the fundamental human questions. And if you really think about it, all the things that really and truly interest us are only possible in a world where we are bigger than matter, where there's a part of us that transcends materialistic necessity, where there's something in us of infinite worth and true spiritual power. Again, I'm not talking about grace, and I'm not talking about justification, and I'm not talking about Christianity. I'm just saying in a human being is something animals don't have, plants don't have, rocks don't have. There's something in us, a faculty of knowledge and ability to communicate and to share and to reason and to love and to choose and to investigate and to wonder and to reflect even on yourself. That's unique in the universe, as far as we know. And so there must be some unique faculty, right, that makes that possible. So we're not
Yeah.
trying to invent something, it's like, oh, let's believe in unicorns. Let's just invent something that no one's ever heard of or thought of. We're trying to explain what we already fundamentally know deep down in our bones. We are special in some way. Or we have
Oh,
an
what was
ability to,
that?
yeah. Oh no,
You just
did I lose you?
that was hilarious. I don't know what you did, but all of a sudden you said we're special and all this like
The
sparkly
lights
stuff
begin to
came up.
show. Yeah.
That is amazing. I want that. I want to be able to do that. I know. Sorry, Jim, to cut you off because whoever's watching this is going to find that
No.
funny. I know when I do that sometimes, like if I know that's happened with me. I've done that, and the thumb comes up. See, it won't do it now, but that was fantastic. That was like. So all right. So let's summarize what we've got so far because we've gone like nearly an hour and a half. So what do we have so far? The two
So,
we've. I know
we've
we've
actually
covered.
talked. Let me just go back and we'll cover them all. So we're looking at proofs for the immortality of the soul. We've looked at the first argument, which is um, any theory of the human soul that doesn't allow for the possibility of true human reasoning, true human thoughts, has to be rejected. And materialism doesn't allow that, so materialism has to be rejected. And the alternative to
Gone.
materialism is immaterialism, that we have something immaterial about us that allows us the freedom to truly know things. And then we talked about the second argument, which is simply we can know immaterial things, right? We can know unchangeable truths, right? That the interior angles of a triangle are 180 degrees, and that means that the thing that knows that can't be in matter, because everything that's in matter is changeable. It's possible to change it because nothing in matter is eternal, right? Even protons and electrons apparently are going to break down over a certain amount of time. There's just nothing unchangeable about the material world. But this knowledge we have is unchanging. Therefore, there must be something unchanging in us. We also talked a little bit about um, immaterial ideas, that the ideas like horse or dog or justice or love, they don't have any material elements or properties, and so to know them, we must be able to know them in a completely immaterial way, and therefore there must be some faculty, power, principle, ability that is immaterial, because something that completely material could never have an immaterial thought or an idea, but we do. Therefore, we must have an immaterial faculty. And the last argument is one we haven't really touched on, but basically, we have two kinds of knowledge. We have sensible knowledge. Okay, so like when I pet my dog, right? I have particular knowledge of this particular dog, a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. Okay, and we have intellectual knowledge. But our intellectual knowledge is not limited to particular things. So, for example, if I say man is a rational animal, right? I'm saying that's true of all human beings. That's a universal truth. It doesn't just apply to Matt Marsden and Jim Burnham, right, and our wives. It applies. It applies globally. And there's something about our intellectual knowledge, because think about this. I'm pretty sure that man is a rational animal. But if I go wider than that, I'm even more sure. If I say, well, okay, maybe not all people are rational, but I'm going to say that all men are animals. All men are creatures that move and take in oxygen. Okay, that's the definition of an animal. Yeah, I'm even more certain of that. I'm certain that all men are rational animals, but I'm even more certain that all men are animals. But I would be even more certain of saying, well, human beings are at least living things. I'd be even more certain if I said human beings, things. And I'd be even more certain that human beings, like there's something, there's something, right? Because I don't know of any philosopher anywhere who said that there's nothing. All philosophers have at least said, well, there's something. Might not be able to know what it is, or but there's something, right? So notice that as my knowledge gets more and more universal, I get more and more certain. And that the only way to explain that is that our mind. So basically, the further I get from matter, right? The further I get from individual, particular material things, the more certain my knowledge, my intellectual knowledge becomes.
To concept, to a
Yeah.
concept.
And that means that my ability must be far from matter. If I get more certain as I get further from matter, there must be something in me that is far from matter, that is itself very, very separated from matter, because the ideas that approach that are more certain to me. Anyway, so and the only thing to account for that would be if the faculty that knows those universal intellectual ideas is far from matter. So anyway, one or more of those four arguments will appeal to different people. But those are the four, I think, best arguments for the immortality of the soul.
Jim, thank you so much. I know we danced around a bit with my questions. I absolutely love this subject. To me, like I said to you at the very beginning, when I very first heard you say this, it was earth-shattering to me because I'd never ever heard it.
Yeah, you can make an intellectual argument for the immortality of the soul. I thought that was just like religious mumbo jumbo. No,
it's just something that someone made up to, like, what most people say is to, like, control you, keep you under the thumb. It's not. I'm not saying it's pre-religion. It's certainly pre the Christian religion.
It is, and it does push you, because the moment you accept, as I think you must, that you have this immaterial power, faculty, ability, you do have to ask the question where it came from. You do, right? Where did it come from? Because immaterial things can't come from material things, right? Matter makes matter. Only spirit can make spirit. So you do have to start to ask the bigger questions, right? If I am a free, knowing being that can reason and abstract, where did that come from? What does it mean? What are my obligations? Why? What am I supposed to do with that? Just, play tiddlywinks? Scroll on my phone? Or am I supposed to do something with this incredible, dare I say, godlike power, right? This is a power that transcends matter. I can know things. I can choose things.
And it's funny, Jim, because people say, like, well, we know better than apes, and we know better. Like, well, hang on a minute.
Hang on. Yeah. Show me an ape that does philosophy. Show me an ape that understands that he has an immortal soul. Show me an ape that can paint a picture. Show me an ape that can tell a joke.
Even questions.
Like we have things in us that are completely that transcend what the animal world can do. Now, some animals are very, very intelligent, and there are some gray areas where you go, man, that elephant seems to have a pretty good memory, and I have memory, and and so we can talk about, does that mean...
that dog loves me. The dog loves me because it comes up and it rubs,
do they have basic emotions?
its head up against me.
I think they do. I think certain animals, especially the higher animals, do have basic emotions. But do they have the ability to know the interior angles of a triangle are equal to 180 degrees? You show me an animal that can grasp that, and then I'll rethink my position. I think we're special. I think we deserve to
But
think that we're special.
but even if they had the intelligence, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the spiritual connection to understand that.
Right. Right.
Right.
So anyway, that's a whole
Because
nother
the
topic, but
argument
yeah,
people would say, well, that's an IQ thing. It's because they're not as smart.
I would say it's not a difference of degree. It's a difference of kind.
Right.
Right. Certain things are just are on the same spectrum. You go, well, okay, there's more or less of this. But I think there are certain things that we do as human beings. For example, our ability to truly know something, okay, to know unchanging truths, immaterial truths. Um, that ability, I don't see that in the animal world. They can know individual particular things. They can know things by association, right? Pavlovian response, no problem. But can they really and truly know something? I don't know I think that's as far as we know, I think that's unique to humans and to and perhaps any other intellectual beings that there might be. But I don't think I don't think animals are capable of that in that same profound
Right.
freedom and perfection of knowing. We have an ability to know, and to know that we know, that is not shared by the animal kingdom in any way. They can know individual things, but not universal things.
Yeah.
They can know,
It,
yeah.
yeah. The human. I'm actually fed up of people kind of dumbing us down. I mean, just generally anyway. But the human brain, the human soul. I don't say the human brain. The human mind is
Right.
incredible, and we've kind of dulled it. And I do think I know it sounds silly, Jim, but I think that a lot of light pollution has had a lot to do with this because I think that when you go to somewhere like Montana and there's no lights and you look up and you see the stars, it's very moving, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
I am so small. What does this mean? Like, what is that? You
Yeah.
want to find out. I don't know how people can't question their roles or their meaning when you look at the sky. And I know it sounds, like I said, I know it sounds like a very silly thing, but we've disconnected from that. We've disconnected
Yeah.
with walking on barefoot on grass,
Yeah.
sitting and listening to the birds song. All these things are things that kind of move us towards questioning. They certainly did with me anyway.
No, absolutely. I think one of the most profound things you can possibly do is lay on your back on a dark night and stare at the cosmos and
Yeah,
just
it's
look at the
amazing. It's
stars. It's
incredible.
unbelievable.
It's
To go walk in a mountain. I think there's a reason that people were drawn to mountains. They were drawn to these. I think we need to get into nature. There's something about nature that reveals who we are
yeah.
and and the grandeur of the whole thing. And I think if we live too long in a concrete jungle with light pollution and 24-hour entertainment, we become disconnected, not just from the natural world. We become disconnected from ourselves, and uh, and
Jim,
and it's a
It's
sad
funny
thing.
that it's funny because there's a real difference between looking inward and being selfish. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like focusing on
Mm-hmm.
yourself
Mm-hmm.
as different to looking inward to yourself.
Yeah, we're not talking about focusing on our belly buttons or some sort of narcissistic self preoccupation. We're simply saying, what is it in me that allows me to truly know something? What is it in me that allows me to choose something? That's a freedom that just because I do it every day doesn't mean I should take it for granted,
Yeah.
right? Every time I put forth my hand and I grab a cup of coffee, that shouldn't numb me to the miracle, right? That I am exerting my will through the physical universe. Somehow my spirit is moving matter. I don't know quite how. I don't have to
Well,
know
you
all.
know,
But it shouldn't blind me to the miracle,
well,
the
one
amazing
of the fun.
thing that's happening.
So one of the funny
Go ahead.
things that, and you know this because you train, you've run marathons, and one of the things that you can find when you lack water is that your body will tell you to eat, or you'll kind of you'll feel like you need to consume calories, and when what it really is your body saying, I'm dehydrated, right? And I'll
Right.
get it any way I can, and you're not giving me a drink, so I'll go and I'll eat. And so I think that when it comes to appetites and people, in the word appetite, you know what I mean, in the classical word of appetite, is that we have a deep desire to understand, right? Whether that's ourselves, whether that's the world. And we tend, in this day and age, what we do is we, like with the other appetites as well, for healthy appetites that we're meant to have, like healthy appetites for sex, is that we tend to look for it in all the wrong places, right? And because we're getting, it's almost like, you really really need to go out and have be satiated by a really good steak, but if you can just get a box of nerds and eat them right now, then that will stop you feeling hungry for that
Yeah.
period of time,
Yeah.
but that's not
Yeah. Yeah.
really
Yeah.
feeding your body. So I think that we have this weird situation going on where we have more information than ever in history at our fingertips. We have more knowledge, right, really, of the known world,
Incredible.
include, I mean, and this is part of that knowledge, right? This is part of the body of knowledge that we have. I mean, let's say it's thousands of years old, and we have it, but we don't look there, right? We don't
Right.
go to the places even where we did 100 years ago, right? 100 years ago, I mean, even I remember looking and seeing the letters that were written from Civil War soldiers back home, and it was amazing. Like, their penmanship was incredible. The way they constructed the letters were,
Yeah, and
it's
their knowledge of history and mythology and the Bible and the classics of Western civilization. They're very well educated.
they had it. They this was a discussion they had quite often, right? And again,
Right.
I think that when you are going off and you saw those guys going off and fighting for something that they really believed in, that you look back and see why they did it, right? And they did it because they thought it was the right thing to do. I know that a lot of others said, I'm going to fight because I've got to fight with my brother next to me. But my point is that we've got to a point now where we just grab the Big Mac, right? We just grab the thing that's just gonna satiate us right there, and we're not getting the nutrients that we need. We're not getting the meat and potatoes that we need as human beings to move forward, right? And you see it all the time. You see it with all these riots in the colleges and all these movements with these young kids that haven't been taught this, even though they're at college. And look, I hadn't been taught it. I found it myself because I'm an absolute maniac when it comes to finding the truth. I want to know what the truth is, and a lot of that is to do with being a dad, and I want to be able to impart that knowledge into
Absolutely.
my children. Right? It's very, very, very important. But you see these kids like struggling so much for purpose and struggling so much to have an identity, and they're struggling with this. They don't know who they are, and they get told who they are by nefarious people instead of looking and saying, you should know who you are, right? They tell them that they do, but they don't really. They're like, they're manipulated to their position, whereas back in the day there were certain things that were known, right? And like you're in part now, the amount of people that are going to watch this, I hope people watch to the end, because I know that it's a dense subject. It's something very heavy, but it's ultimately rewarding. And that's why I believe it's funny, because some people said to me, you should just do like 10-minute, YouTube things.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not going to do that, because people want more. Like they're really
Yeah.
desperate for uh, something that addresses these deeper desires that we innately have in us to understand these things. These are the
Right.
big questions. And what they're doing is that they're waving, it's like, squirrel, they're waving the shiny object in
Yeah,
front of
yeah.
you.
We're distracting with shiny objects. Think about it. If you're told you're nothing more than a glorified ape, you're just the latest iteration of the survival of the fittest through a random, you know, uh, heartless universe, and that you're just an accident of the universe,
It's part of the
and you're a little
process.
and you're a little more clever than the animals around you. You have your opposable thumb, but ultimately you're just an animal. You're just a clever little thing, and you're here today and you're gone tomorrow. Well, I mean, what kind of expectations can you possibly have
Yeah, you
for
don't have
yourself?
any. You don't have
So
any.
of course, so you're ripe. You're ripe for like, oh, but you know what? You do have value in a group. If you're part of some, marginalized group, now you have identity. Now you have value. Wait a minute. What about the fact that you have value because you have this power to know and to choose and to love? And this power makes you different from the universe. It makes you, part of you is separate from the physical universe and connected to whatever else might be separate from the physical
It's
universe.
amazing.
Like,
It's
it's
amazing
it's a
thing.
totally different story. It's a totally different story. You're in a totally different movie where you matter and your actions matter and your choices matter. In the first movie, you're just what's the word? A background character, right?
Yeah,
You're just
you're an extra. You're
you're an
like an
extra.
NPC.
You're just an
You
NPC.
don't.
You don't matter. The bigger story goes on, and you are just a cog in the cosmic wheel. That's very different than if you are a spiritual being with a part of you that will exist forever. It's a different story, right?
And it
And you're
also
going to
makes your
play your part
decisions
differently.
different. Yeah,
Makes your decisions
exactly. You
different.
make it different. Yeah,
Everything's different. Everything's different.
and Jim, and here's the thing. That's that part of it. We haven't even spoken about why, right? And the thing that would have made that immortal soul come into existence. That's a whole other different thing. That's like the Empire Strikes Back.
Right, right.
That's the next movie that's even
Exactly.
better than the first one.
Right. That's right. But it matters. The story, who we are matters. What we are matters. Because it matters how much how much we're going to value ourselves, how much we're going to value our place in the world. And if we're nothing but a meaningless accident, a glorified ape, an extra in an uncaring, meaningless universe,
How miserable is that, though?
just give me the Big Mac. Just give me the Big
Yeah,
Mac because I don't care, right?
yeah.
Why would
And by
I?
the way, the
Why
Big
should I want
Mac,
anything better than that?
you end up wanting to eat something 10 minutes later because it doesn't make you feel
But your
good,
point
right?
is
So
right. We are deep down. We want more than that for ourselves. We want meaning to our lives and to our thoughts and to our decisions. We want our lives to matter. We want our very being to be important. And believing the soul isn't like some sort of wish fulfillment, right? And I think all those desires come from that reality. It's from the reality of that spiritual element, that immaterial faculty, that these deep, irrepressible desires, this deep dissatisfaction with Big Macs and surface shiny objects and trinkets. We want more because I think deep down we know we are worth more, but we haven't been told the story of who we really are. And that's a
yeah,
shame. That's the biggest shame I
and
can
by the
think of.
way, Jim, I think that, and I want to clarify this because watching Russell Brand and his evolution and his path, his journey has been absolutely amazing,
It's
and
astonishing.
it's unbelievable. But I want to make it clear because this talks to what you were saying earlier on, or all the way through this podcast, is that the joy that people feel that are in our situation, that have gone along the same journey, is not about, hey, yeah, great, he's joining the gang, right? It
Right.
is, hey, what he's experiencing, we know is amazing, right? It's a gift. And it's something that you, when you see someone go along that path, whoever it is, whoever it might be, it fills you with joy. And again, that's another thing that is in us, is to feel happy when someone else finds happiness or when someone else finds success. Like we have that in us, which again, if we were just dumb apes, we'd be looking and we go, oh, I want to pull him down, and blah, 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 which we see a lot of in there. So I guess there's a lot of dumb apes out there. But the joy, like when I've watched his progression, and I've done it. I've been there, right? I went through the same progression. So I can really empathize with it, in the sense that searching for the truth, finding out what the truth is, going somewhere when you really, really didn't, you didn't want to, you were trying to follow the truth, but you didn't want it to go there, right? That's the
Right.
one place you didn't want it to lead. And you're like, look, if I'm going to be intellectually honest, I've got to go there. I've got to go, and there's nothing I can do about it. So anyway, Jim, I can see like we've had you chatting forever, and now your
My
earpods
earpods
out
have
of charge.
died.
Oh, there you go. So I do want to say this. I'm going to put an offer out, and I'm asking Jim on this. He doesn't know I'm going to ask him this, but if anyone has any questions, I want to do a live stream with Jim at some point. So if you've got any, if you want to post up questions and say, look, I don't believe this, we can do it real time. We can address each one of those questions. Jim, would you? I'll put you on the spot now,
Yeah.
right? You're going to
What can
come back
I
and
can't say no, can
you,
I? You've taken away my freedom.
exactly. Cha cha. See, I know you well enough. No, because I know
No,
you'd
that would
want to
be.
do it,
I think
but
that would be fun. That would be a nice challenge. That'd be fun to do.
yeah, and the thing is Jim has a bunch of material as well. That Jim, do you have a website that people can go to?
Yeah.
Do you have any?
Yeah. I have a website called CatholicApologetics.com,
Right.
and if you're a Catholic or you're Catholic curious, I explain what Catholics believe and why, and give the historical and biblical and just logical reasons for Catholic beliefs. So if you're Catholic and you want to know more about your faith, great. If you're non-Catholic and you want to know why Catholics do some of the wackadoo stuff that they do, I've got materials that would help answer those questions.
Yeah, I was going to say all
CatholicApologetics.com.
the Protestants are gone.
Yeah, boo.
But you know what?
Listen,
You know
but
it's
none of my argument requires anything Catholic, right? My argument today has, which
nothing.
I love it. It's pure reason. It's pure Greek logic, and
Yeah.
that's everybody's patrimony. That's it's everyone
That's
deserves
that's
to know
that's
those
the
truths.
basis of Western civilization. Everyone should know it, right?
Absolutely.
Like everyone should know this. So I invite you guys again, please. If you, I know, like I said, I know this is dense, right? I know it's heavy stuff, right? But I believe in you. If I can learn it, if I can understand, because I think this is really, really
Yeah.
important. I really do. I don't believe that the people that are watching my stuff are just flaky and they just want to, learn about, movies. I just don't believe that. And I
No.
think it's important for people to understand that we all have different skills. We all have different facets. We have different weaknesses and different strengths. And I think that talking about this really mattered to me, and it really changed my life when I heard this the first time. And again, I felt betrayed. And by the way, part of that comes from pastors and priests and religious organizations that aren't doing a good job, because you know what? They think that you are not ready for it. They think that you cannot take it, and it's not true. You absolutely
Yeah.
can. And so it's up to people like us to come out there and expose you to it. So what we're going to do is we will have another session, maybe in a couple of weeks. I'll let you guys know. I'll look at the feedback, see how it goes, and then we'll come on and we'll do a live session where Jim can respond to your questions, and we can break it down, to my level, right? Because I need it broken down to my level. But I really do. I want to thank you first,
Oh,
Jim. I mean, you're one of my closest friends. I'm very grateful for you. And I want to thank you for taking the time for coming on this channel and talking about this, because I think it's unbelievable. I hope everyone else appreciated it.
Matt, thank you for having me, and just thanks for making the time and getting the word out. I do think that this is one of the great truths of who we are, and it needs to be more widely known. So thank you for all you're doing to promote that.
No, thank you. And one thing I have to say is, just remember, no matter what happens, not all actors are like this. I promise.